particular presentation today has to do with architecture. And I'm going to try to make it not boring because it's definitely a passion of mine. I took a class on it during my undergrad. And the subject today is about how architecture can be influenced very heavily by the environment around it, particularly the social environment. So we're looking at things like religion and culture, history, and economic status, someone's wealth. These things definitely come into play when you build something or you decide to live somewhere. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at a couple of things here. And what I'm going to do in this presentation, because it's a very, very broad topic, I did it by example. So I chose one example. I'm going to kind of run through it so you guys get an understanding of, in this particular example, how it comes into play. Now, one of my sources was actually a book called Domestic Architecture of Benjamin Latrobe, and Latrobe is actually the architect that I'm going to be using his example today. Excuse me. So we're looking at something called Pope Villa. That's a place. It's actually down in Kentucky. It was built in 1813. And in the book, Domestic Architecture of Benjamin Latrobe, what we have is two authors, Fazio and Spannon. And what they do is, we're just going to quickly go through a couple of features that you might see in the architecture. Now, well, I already went to this, sorry. Now, this is actually the Pope Villa. And what we see here is that the features that you'll see are based on Palladio Georgian design. And I spelled Georgian wrong, I apologize for that. But what we're going to do is, can anyone kind of tell me what they see here? What they think might be Palladio, what they think might be Georgian? Do you have any idea?
When I see the word Georgian, I think of like the plantations or kind of like the southern influence.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what we're going to see here is that Georgian is actually based on King George. Now, this was actually a little bit after our independence. That was all during 1776. Now, 1813 is when this was built, and at that time, you're looking at King George III. Now, Palladio, we're going to start with that first. Palladio is really the Roman influence, and he was an Italian architect during the 1500s. And some of the influence that we'll see from Palladio are the columns. Now, they're Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. I'm just going to kind of speed through this because you guys don't have to know, but just a little briefing on it. The Doric is what we'll be focusing on here because as we go through it, you'll see that the architecture is pretty simple. It's not going to get too ornate, and as we go through the discussion, I'll explain why that's the case. Doric is not always fluted. It's showing that it's fluted and has a grooves here. Sometimes it can be simpler and just plain. Ionic is a little bit more ornate, and then you have Corinthian, which usually has more of the scrolls and natural features like leaves. Another feature that we'll see here are Venetian windows, corridors, arches. There are different variations of those also, but this is the main idea of what it's going to look like. And the third one, you guys can probably tell, is going to be the dome. Now that's something that most of us are very familiar with. That over there is the Parthenon, which I hope most of you know, or all of you, if not. The dome is a feature which I'll actually get into that discussion a bit, and it signifies a lot. It has a big influence on socio-economic status. Now, moving on to Georgian influences, can you tell how this is different from the Palladio? Can you tell just by looking at it? Okay, maybe just me.
The entrance is totally different. The entrance is totally different.
You should know, right? So what happens here with the Georgian, which is from Great Britain, you're going to see a lot more, it's very boxy first of all. So that's definitely something that you're going to see, as opposed to something like this, which is Baroque. Now, with the boxy features, you'll see windows, the window panes are always in odd numbers. You'll never see them in pairs. You'll see the little sashes on the windows there with the little grids. That's a Georgian design. You'll see a portico in the front, which is that main little mini porch area. That's also a very Georgian style, I should say. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is the reason that the Georgian style came into play in the South, the time frame that I'm focusing is called the antebellum, which is like a pre-Civil War period. And there was something called the backlash to the Baroque style. The Baroque was very ornate, very different from the Georgian style. Now, the reason that this took place is because of something called the 7 Years' War. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. When King George III was in reign, there was tension between Great Britain and France and Spain. This actually originated from Spain, and due to that tension and the fact that King George was very pious, was very religious. So another idea that I'm going to discuss later on is that religiousness tries to separate itself from doing anything too ornate or too rich looking. You want to be as modest as possible, which is far from this. Now, my second topic here is religion and culture, and how that relates to the Pope Villa in this case. Now, what we're going to see is that there is a contradiction that was created when religion came into place here. You can see the influence in there through certain things which I'll go through. There's religion, and then there is industrialism, which is something that was actually coming to play at that time. And with industrialism, what we'll see is that if you look inside the blueprint of the Pope Villa, being religious, and since the dome was something that was actually, it showed wealth at that time. You didn't want to show it, so when Latrobe, the architect, created this, he actually disguised it. And you can see this in the actual blueprint. The roof goes over the dome so that you can't see it from the outside. And you don't want to see that, because that's, in this case, the person that it was made for was John Pope. He was a senator in Kentucky at the time. If you show it for political reasons and for other reasons as well, you want to look pious. You want to go and conform with the rest of society. So in order to do that, it's hidden there. But at the same time, the Industrial Revolution caused a growing feeling of wanting to enhance yourself and step away from not being as, or not showing your wealth, at least I should say. Now, another common factor that you'll see here with the religiousness that I was talking about, there's a lot of rationality, a lot of symmetry. And you'll see that in the blueprint. It's a perfect square or a perfect circle, very pure shapes. And that symmetry was very important, especially for Greeks and Romans. And you'll see that in the Parthenon as well, in the Palladio, which was Palladio's structure. Now, something else that I want to bring up is that Thomas Jefferson had his home called Monticello, which was in Virginia. Now, Monticello, it was made before the Pope Villa was made, and it was actually before something called the Second Great Awakening. Do you guys know what that is? It was a period of Christian revivalism in America. This was the second one. There was another one that took place in the 1700s. Now, when this happened, this is what created the whole sense of being pious. And so what we did was, you'll see the use of the dome here is shown because it was done before. Everyone wanted to show that they were so religious. So the connection here is that the dome is there to almost show reverence, I should say. And it was used with the Romans and the Greeks, and later they used it and kind of shifted the attention to politicians. They used to use it for martyrs. That's where it started, from the idea of the dome, to show reverence to the martyrs. Oh, and the other idea here is that before the Great Awakening, he showed the dome, but after, like I showed in the blueprint before, they hid it. So that was the main difference. Now, another difference here is that in terms of religion and culture, you wanted to not show that it was a plantation house. Plantation house was basically a style. There were farmhouses, and they were all over the South. So in this case, what they did was, there was a growing trend of the wealthy people creating villas that looked like plantation houses. And that's exactly what they did, although it was nothing like it because it wasn't a farmhouse. And another feature was, in terms of socioeconomic status, you want to show large pillars, show your wealth, and you would see these things at the entrance of the actual house, and also inside where you saw the dome area, the entrance of the dome when you go upstairs. Now, in conclusion, what I want to do is just let you know that there was an interview that I took with my father, and he's actually an architect as well. And when I asked him one of the questions regarding architecture and how closely it's interconnected with society, this is what he said. It's basically like a picture is worth 1,000 words. A building is like an expression. It speaks volumes. It can tell you who has been in that space, what it has been through, and what it believes. So there's really a lot of expression, a lot that you can get out of looking at a building. You just have to pay attention.